Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Day 3, Session 1 of Steel Mint Engage 3.0, the Virtual Connect. Engage 3.0 is an online webinar series being held from the 1st to the 4th of November 2022. In these webinars, we have already explored a range of topics related to steel, iron ore, scrap and metallics, coal, ferroalloys, and non-ferrous. We are also focusing on relevant issues like carbon emissions and also the scenario in Europe and Ukraine, especially against the backdrop of the ongoing war. Our efforts are aimed at discussing changing market dynamics in finished steel and raw materials to facilitate decision making. I'm Madhumita Mukherjee, Editor Steel Mint, your webinar host.
And I'm Nisha Mukherjee, General Manager Steel and Iron Ore at Steel Mint, who will be co-hosting this session, which is on what are the factors driving steel demand recovery in ASEAN.
I would also like to thank the Ministry of Steel and the Indian Steel Association for their logo support. Let me mention that we will take audience queries at the end of the session. So requesting all of you tuned in to send your queries in the chat box, and we will take this up in good time. I also request you all to mention your name and company when you send in your request. Thank you. I now invite my colleague Nisha Mukherjee to make a presentation related to the topic. Over to you, Nisha.
Thanks, ma'am. I hope my screen is visible.
It is visible.
Thank you. So first we'll have a brief overview about the factors which are driving the steel demand recovery in ASEAN, followed by the current market trends of production, consumption, and the factors that we need to look out for in the near term. So starting with the macroeconomic indicators, if we look at the GDP growth rate numbers, so largely if we look at the forecast for 2022 versus the comparison in 2021, then we see majorly all the countries are expected to witness a positive GDP growth, except I think Singapore, which is showing a drop. So going by the numbers, Philippines, the GDP growth rate is expected to be forecasted in the range of 7 to 8% versus 5.6% in 2021. And Vietnam is again likely to have the growth rate around 6.5% versus 2.6% in the last year. Coming up by numbers with the country's perspective, so Indonesia's economy grew by about 5% year on year in Q1 2022, which was mainly due to the relaxation of the restrictions laid due to COVID and rise in construction and household consumption. The Philippines economy grew about 8.3% in first quarter this year, which was again mainly driven by the household consumption, which grew by 10.6%. Malaysia's construction activities declined 6.2%. However, its manufacturing activities picked up by 6.6% year on year in Q1 2022. Vietnam's GDP rose by 5% in Q1, which was again backed by the increase in construction activities as well as the manufacturing sector, which rose by 2.6% and 7.8% respectively. Thailand's GDP expanded by about 2.2% year on year in Q1 2022. Steel consumption pattern of ASEAN. So in 2019, the volumes had shot up about to 80 million tons before witnessing a drop to about 72 million tons in 2020 because, of course, the reason was COVID. And then back in 2021, we have seen a rebound to about 77 million tons. So that is how the steel consumption pattern has changed in last few years in ASEAN. Now let's have a quick look at the crude steel production numbers. So Vietnam's crude steel production volumes have increased from about 20 million tons in 2020 to about 23.6 million tons in 2021. There was a drop seen in Indonesia crude steel production volumes, wherein it fell from 12.9 to 12.5. Rest, Malaysia has been largely stable, and the growth has been seen in the crude steel production volumes of Thailand, which rose from 4.5 million tons in 2020 to 5.6 million tons in 2021. Then, if we talk about the near-term outlook, the recent release by WSA, short-term outlook, says that the ASEAN would largely show a growth in this year, that is 2022, which is of course backed by the COVID recovery, plus the increase in the construction infrastructure activities, especially boosted by the government spendings in countries like Malaysia and Philippines. This slide pertains to the crude steel capacity expansions, especially from the blast furnace route that are being coming up in the ASEAN in the very near term. So going by the numbers, we see that roughly about 91 million tons of crude steel capacities is likely to be added in the near term, largely from the blast furnace route. Talking about country-wise, so we have Malaysia on the top in terms of the increase in the capacities. We have, of course, the ramp-up plans and the new plants coming in like Alliance, Eastern Steel, etc. Vietnam, already we have the increase coming in from Hua Phat in place, and some more like Pomena and Formosa Hatin expansions lined up. Indonesia, again, we have the Dexin, Krakatau, etc., who are lined up for more expansions. And Philippines, of course, Steel Asia and Panwa Group. What are the factors that we need to watch out for 2022 and as well as 2023? Of course, the projects that were postponed due to COVID, labor shortages, inflation rates, etc., the resumption is a key factor that will drive the demand recovery in ASEAN. Rising interest rates, hike in energy cost, inflation rates, currency depreciation. These are the common factors that we have been hearing post the Russia-Ukraine trade war, which have been influencing the economies. And of course, the changing market dynamics in Chinese steel sector. So this was all that I had to present. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rishta, so much for that very good presentation. It was a good snapshot of ASEAN forecasting on GDP, crude steel capacity, and also the factors to watch out for. What are the factors driving steel demand recovery in ASEAN? High inflation rates and continuing geopolitical issues have dampened business sentiments the world over, including ASEAN. Significant increase in commodity prices at the start of the war and the subsequent downward correction in prices led to uncertainty in the market as buyers stayed away, waiting for prices to fall further. In the pre-war period, intermittent COVID disruptions also dampened domestic demand as lockdowns reduced mobility and construction activities. As lockdowns eased, demand rebounded, but supply could not match due to production constraints. ASEAN countries, depending on foreign labor, faced manpower crunch, stalling construction activities further. So when the war struck, commodity prices were already headed north and the demand rebound. Amid the demand rebound. But inflation is a red flag at present, which governments are fighting through rate hikes and price controls. We will learn more about ASEAN demand recovery and near-term challenges and outlook from our very special guest this morning, Mr. Rajiv Mangal, President and CEO, Tata Steel Thailand. Mr. Mangal is also on the board of Nat Steel Holdings Private Limited. In his past career, he occupied the position of Chief Technical of Wire Marketing and Sales at Tata Steel Limited. He has an undergrad degree from the Indian Institute of Technology, Roorkee, and is an alumnus of XLRI, Jamshedpur. Over to you, Mr. Mangal.
Thank you, Madhumita, and pleasure to join with Steelmint colleagues and all my other friends. Just one correction, you mentioned me on the board of Nat Steel. This was last year. Tata Steel has divested out of Nat Steel a year ago, and hence I don't have a direct engagement with Nat Steel, though we still have a lot of friends there. Thank you once again. Thank you once again, and it's a pleasure to be on the platform. Hope to have a good interactive, close to 45 minutes. Let me give you a quick snapshot on what do we see here. ASEAN with almost 680 million people is a significant population with various degree of development. We normally call ASEAN or ASEAN 6 as a single word, but it's not a homogeneous region. You got Singapore on one side and you got Laos, Myanmar, Cambodia on the other side. So it's a very wide market, not a homogeneous market, and hence it has its own challenges as well as opportunities into the system. Over the years, ASEAN was always a net importer of steel, and whatever manufacturing was here was largely scrap-based long product. Okay, so Thailand was, ASEAN was a big importer of flat product, and even in long product, it used to be primarily wire rods that used to be there. Seeing that opportunity in the last few years, a lot of investments have come into ASEAN. Some have already taken shape, some will take shape in due course of time, and almost all of them are with some Chinese support. And I see a pattern in that because ASEAN has a big market. It is looking for investments, so they are offering incentives for investment. The environment pressures are not as strict as they are in China and in many other parts of the world. And it also gives an opportunity for the companies to export back into China, as well as handle that challenge which was there between 2015 to 2020 on made in China steel, which brought in a lot of tariff and non-tariff barriers around the world. So there is to me, a strong business rationale why so much investments are being planned into ASEAN region, predominantly backed up by Chinese big companies. So going forward, as was also shown in the slide, plans are huge. If all of them materialize, from a net importer, ASEAN will become a net exporter of steel. So that becomes another set of challenge. ASEAN is anywhere close to India. So ASEAN shares maritime border with India, and with many countries there's a free trade agreement. So on one side, companies in India have an opportunity to sell, but in future, there will also be a threat of exports, from ASEAN into India. So it is both an opportunity and a threat, depending on which side of the coin we kind of look at. But on and on, I think it's an exciting world. Almost all of ASEAN is now fully open after COVID. There were significant dents in the business because of COVID. This region is very heavily dependent on tourism. Okay, and that's an area which was kind of closed. But things are now opening up, as we also saw in the GDP recovery numbers. So people are positive, we are positive. Let's hope we see better times ahead. So that's a brief from my side. I'll be happy to take your questions going forward.
Thank you so much, sir. That was really an insightful opening remarks, at least that it is showing that things are improving at ASEAN end as well, and probably with the forecast in active growth rates that we forecast in 2022, probably the steel capacity ramp-ups that are planned may also come into place. So we may see steel capacity expansions as well as the exports coming in. So here we begin with the questions. And just a gentle reminder to our online attendees to put in their queries in the chat box. Do mention your name as well as company name while you put in your queries. So the first question, sir, that I would like you to just share your views on that. What has been the steel production and consumption scenario like in the past couple of quarters for ASEAN? And what are the factors that you feel would be impacting the steel trends in these regions in the near short term?
ASEAN traditionally is around an 80 million ton market. Okay, 2021 was an aberration, so I would kind of keep it aside for the time being. So it's typically an 80 million market with roughly divided between long and flat, almost 42 million ton, divided in between. The share of flat is going up, as rightly so, as the geographies and the countries get developed, the share of flat product goes up over long product. But this region is primarily a construction activity driven region. Okay, on an average, my gut feeling is at least 70 to 75% of the steel used is for construction activities. That is also, a lot of it is long product, but with due course of time in construction, it moves from long to flat, as economies evolve and as construction practices evolve. In terms of capacity additions, it's largely coming in the 3-4 countries, Malaysia, Vietnam, Indonesia, and Philippines. However, the pace of announcement and the and the execution of the ground, there is a difference. Number one, because of COVID. Number two, because of geopolitical issues, there are concerns in the market, and there's a view that we might be heading for a kind of a recession, which sometimes people hold back on their capital investment plans. So my view is things will go a little slow because even the existing companies who have invested, many of them have cut down their production. Some of them have throttled their blast furnaces. It's a costly affair to throttle a blast furnace. It's easy with a scrap-based company to on off the operations. So companies are careful, where do you kind of invest, and that pacing of capital expenditure will happen in due course of time. In construction, it's between government supported construction, which is like mega projects, or there's a private construction, which is between developers, offices, and let's say condominiums and those kind of stuff. The way things are in terms of inflation, high interest rate, weak currencies, and general sentiment not being so bullish, my view is private consumption and investment will be a little slow till the time we see light at the end of the tunnel. But most of the countries in this region need a lot of support on public investment because the infrastructure development needs a lot to be done, road, rail, ports, everything. And that's what most of the countries are doing. Thailand, Indonesia, Vietnam, Philippines, everybody has announced big plans on the infrastructure development, which is great news for steel companies and construction material companies in the region. Key to watch will be the rollout of projects, the fund allocation of project, depending on how the government revenues are. But the plans are in place. I think something may switch few quarters here and there, but the region will witness significant improvement in the overall infrastructure demand. If I come specifically to Thailand, that's where our prime business is. Thailand has made a lot of plans to upgrade its airports, to upgrade railway systems. There's a plan to connect Bangkok to Laos border to high-speed train. In future, it will go down, crossing Malaysia, going up to Singapore. Then there are plans to upgrade the ports because Thailand is in the middle of the region. They see them as a supply chain, let's say, excellence center. So we are seeing a lot of activities on infrastructure improvement with road, rail, and ports. And that is what will primarily support the steel demand. Auto industry, which is another big consumer of steel, let's say around 20-25% of the world steel gets consumed in auto industry. There things are a little flat. Last 2 years struggle was on semiconductors. Just now there is a little bit of a queue, but in Thailand, which typically operates with, let's say, 2 million vehicles, it's almost flat like that for the last 2 years. So auto demand movement has not been as good as it is in the construction sector.
So you said that investments in steel are coming in, though in the short term things have slowed down a bit, but because of global sentiments, but they are bound to look up in the medium to short term, medium to long term. Now, you also said that it's an 80 million ton market where the share of flats is going up. I want to know, sir, in the new capacities that will be coming up, what will the ratio be like? I mean, what will the ratio get skewed and to what extent?
The investment plans are known and they are in public domain. A lot of it is in the flat product side. Okay, so we will see more of HR, CR or coated products getting into the system. The region, in my opinion, already has surplus rebar making capacity, so it doesn't make too much of a business sense to add more rebar capacities. What we don't count properly and sometimes information is not readily available is the information on induction furnaces. The plants what we talk is typically blast furnace. Okay, but after China shut down induction furnaces in 2007, 2018, the full region has been now flooded with IF. And again, a lot of them is with Chinese investments. Okay, so I think rebar capacities are enough. Wire rod capacities, something will come up into the market, but it will be primarily between HR, CR, coated, where investments will be needed. Even today, most of the imports in the region are restricted towards coated products, because after Dexane, Alliance, Coafart, these people have come into play. Many of the wire rod requirements are now met within the region. Okay, but flat product and coated steel requirements are still, there's a gap, and hopefully will get plugged in future.
I want to ask you something on Thailand in particular. Thailand's GDP expanded by 1.9% in Q4 2021, turning around from a contraction of 0.2 in the quarter before. So how has the scenario changed in 2022?
Thailand is primarily a service and a tourism-driven economy. Okay, and Thailand was badly impacted in 2020 and 2021 on account of COVID restriction. This year, from February, March, things have started opening up. That is number one. Secondly, Thailand is also active on exports market. Okay, so but on the same side, Thailand imports a lot of fuel. Okay, so overall, this year, the forecast for GDP growth for the country is around 3%, for 2022, supported by improvement in tourism sector, supported by high quality of exports, and with the Thai baht being pretty weak, it is a factor which is supporting the exporters. Okay. Situation will improve further as fuel price will come down, because fair amount of Thai forex goes in import of fuel. Okay. But yet, Thailand has an advantage of a current account surplus. That is one of the reasons why historically Thai baht was always much more stable in spite of political issues within the country or outside in the world. Because of current account surplus, exports being higher than imports, the system has been largely stable. So going forward, the drivers of the economy, I presume, will be tourism, will continue to be on exports, services, public sector investment by government. The headwinds that we need to be careful is on high inflation. Currently, Thailand, this year, inflation rate is at 6%. Historically, Thailand operated at 0 to 1% inflation rate. So it is very high by the local standards. Next year forecast is to come down to around 3 to 3.5%. The income of the people went down during tourism being down, because indirectly a lot of people are dependent on it, but that is also improving. So I think the factors to look at is high inflation, weak currency against, but overall the sentiment in the country is much more positive.
So my next question is on Thailand's long steel demand, as you mentioned earlier. So just wanted to understand that last year we saw the long steel demand in Thailand growing by about roughly around 2.5, 2.6% to about 4.7 million tons. And that was again backed by the government construction activities, which rose by about 6%. So how is the scenario currently, and how do you see the long steel demand this year, 2022?
Yeah. So let me give a bigger picture first. Thailand, on an average, consumes around 17 to 18 million tons of steel. Okay, it moves a million ton up and down, sometime due to COVID year, sometimes because of other reasons. But let's look at this market between 17 to 18 million ton. 2/3 is flat, 1/3 is long. Okay, so 12 is flat, around 6 million ton is long. So even in 2021, I think 4.7, the number you quoted, 4.7 was the production of long product in the country. The consumption was around 6.3 million tons. That's broadly the number I remember. Out of 6.3 million tons of flat product or long product, around 3.5 million ton is rebars, around 2 million tons is wire rod, and balance is between seamless tubes, steel wires, and some of the other activities. Last year, Thailand had lockdown for 2-3 months between June to August, and that impacted the consumption and work at site. Also, the construction workers were less. Thailand construction companies depend a lot on Laos, Myanmar workers at site. Okay, so that shortage still continues, and hence the cost of construction sites have gone up because of shortage of labor. After COVID restrictions were removed, things are picking up. So public sector investment has been doing well. Government has been releasing funds. And what happens in Thailand, the budget year starts from 1st of October. Okay, so this also coincides with the closure of the monsoon season. So typically July, September is a weak construction season. So post-October, monsoons recede, new budget comes into the system, so things pick up, and that's what we are also forecasting. Second half of the financial year, should be good for construction, both on the ground as well as for steel demand. So overall this year, but first 9 months, because of, let's say, most of the external factors, demand in steel in Thailand has contracted. So 9 months data in Thailand, the overall construction of steel is around 12%. Okay, it is -4 in long product and -15% in flat product. So 2022 full year, the steel demand will contract, but I'm expecting things will pick up, let's say, from early part of next year.
You actually answered my question. I would have asked you on to what extent has demand and production contracted because of inflation. You also spoke about production cuts. Can that be quantified for ASEAN at present?
For example, Thailand in 2022, the consumption has gone down by 12%. Fair amount of that cut has come from imports. Okay, partly because the countries which were exporting into Thailand, which is China as a dominant player, then there are neighboring countries, their imports has marginally come down, but at the same time, domestic production also got cut, or reduced. See, the advantage of Thailand is everybody produces steel either from electric arc furnace or induction furnace. These can be switched on or switched off. Okay. The second aspect, what matters is in Thailand, the daytime power on Monday to Friday. Okay, so it is 13 hours, 9 a.m. to 10 p.m., 13 hours a day into 5 days, 65 hours. The cost of that power is almost 40% higher than night power. So all the companies always weigh whether to run during the day, and sell it if the market is good. Otherwise, you can run in the night and on the weekend. So in a way, the production is flexible. And if sometime billets are cheaper, people may also buy billets. So it's a very flexible operating system, which moves up and down depending on the profitability, the cost situation into the market. Last but not the least, Thailand energy price was very stable in the last 10 years. This year, right from the beginning of the year, we are seeing both power price and natural gas price going up, which adds to the cost of steel making. And in a weak demand scenario where I told about -12% growth, most of this cost has not been passed on to the market. So the steel industry or the manufacturers are under pressure, and hence some of them who are not so good or not so strong, they sometimes throttle production just to make sure that they don't go into difficult problems.
Sir, I wanted to ask you about the steel expansion plans that are coming up in Thailand specifically. Any projects that you see coming up in 2023?
There is no major steel capacity addition in Thailand. The only additions that are coming is from induction furnace. There is none either from blast furnace or from, let's say, electric arc furnace. Two big players have come up into the market in the last 2 years, and both of them have at least announced expansion plans on their induction furnaces further. So that's where the things stand.
So I think, sir, my next question is very closely related to the expansion that you mentioned. We have seen an increase in scrap import volumes in Thailand, which have risen about 9% during Jan to September 2022 versus last year. So is it the same reason that you mentioned because of the steel capacity ramp-ups, or there are some changing in the market dynamics that is actually boosting it?
2-3 reasons for that. One is there was a new induction furnace player in the market. Thailand is a net importer of scrap. Okay, so on an average, Thailand imports around 15 to 20% of its scrap requirement. And in that situation, a new player came into the market. So the demand for scrap went up. Secondly, for the last few months or last, let's say, 2.5 quarters, the global flow of supply of steel is disturbed, largely because of issues in Europe. And the European prices were good, So a lot of steel from Southeast Asia was getting exported to Europe. So as a result, the billets we choose to come into Thailand reduced, okay, or the billet price was high. So it was more economical to run electric arc furnace or induction furnace using scrap than to buy billets from the international market because of the, let's say, macro dynamics on iron ore price versus the scrap price kind of a situation. So as you mentioned about scrap volume increase, I would expect there would have been a billet import drop. Okay, so that's how the toggle happens, in the market. Just now, if I see between October, November, billet prices have corrected because there is no more flow into Europe. The inventories are already high there. So going forward, I would expect next few months, we will see a cut in scrap imports in Thailand and possibly a rise in billet imports.
In fact, my next question was on billet imports. Billet imports had dropped 17% to 2 million tons during Jan-September as per our data. So I wanted your views, outlook on billet imports, but I think you've already answered that. Yeah, but would you like to add anything further? Would you like to add anything further?
So, these are all, let's say, related. In our market, where it is not growing, it will be typically a substitution. If something goes, something else will come down, and last few months has been. So re-rollers are under pressure. I think in a weak market, finished good market, and billet prices remaining stubbornly strong, not because of Thailand situation, but because of pull in Europe, Turkey, and let's say in Middle Asia, Middle East and Africa. And iron ore coal being on the higher side, people are happy to export at other places and keep billet prices high. But now it is seeing correction. So as I said, H2 of the financial year, I expect a reversal between import of scrap and billets.
Sir, like you mentioned about the inflation rates and energy prices being cause of worry to entire steel industry as a whole and also the ASEAN. So particularly if you would like to share your comments on how Thailand industry has been impacted because of this.
Yeah. So since in Thailand, what happens, the natural gas price changes every month and the electricity price changes every 4 months. Okay, so it is Jan, May, September. So this is the time when government will announce the power price and it remains fixed for the 4 months. So if I look at the first change, let's say in March, April versus October, the power price and natural gas price put together, the impact on steel industry, conversion cost is almost $30 per ton. Okay. Now, in a market where the prices has been declining, the steel demand has not been so good, most of this cost increase has not been passed on to the market. And as a result, it is putting the spreads under pressure. Going ahead, while industry has taken up with the government, but I think governments are also under pressure because the oil prices still remain fairly on the strong side. So gradually, as demand will improve, I think part of this increase will get passed on. But first half and possibly October, December quarter, most of the steel companies' margins will remain under pressure. Situation will be similar in other markets. In fact, I was reading in countries like Indonesia, the increase announced was even steeper, and to that extent that there were protests and issues like this. But it's a free flow of steel, and if there's an increase on the cost on one side, unless there's a capacity to absorb it, the pressure will be felt by the steel companies, which I think is there on most of them just now.
Thank you, sir. So, one last question from our side. What is the outlook for the rest of the year and early next year in terms of steel consumption and prices as well? What is the outlook on prices?
Yeah, so let me talk on the market or business sentiment. I think the worst is behind us. There are more positives than negatives. And when I say positives, I'm saying in terms of COVID, in terms of fuel prices, I think have peaked. Hopefully it should remain stable or marginally come down. Some benefit we are also seeing in the shipping costs. So there'll be some support from that side, and governments are much more open to invest in the infrastructure development. So that should support the demand side. Some of the challenges globally remain. Nobody still knows which way the conflict in Europe will end at. US continues to be bullish on the interest rates, at least in 2022 and 23. And if Fed maintains aggressive position, it will have adverse impact on the local currencies. Okay, so that is again one of the headwinds that I see the businesses have to kind of face. So overall, there is support, there is positive things, but there are headwinds which each company, each business will have to address. But overall, I think it is more on the positive side. So business should see growth. Thailand is expecting between 3 to 3.5% of GDP growth. 2022 demand contraction, I think, should be history. 2023, we should be looking at least 5 to 7% growth in the steel consumption within the country. As far as prices go, currently there is a pressure on price because of weak demand, but there are cost pressures. And hence that will not allow steel prices to go beyond a certain level. Most of the energy cost has not been passed on to the market, and in due course of time, it will get passed on. So overall, I expect steel prices, we should be looking at bottoming unless raw materials like iron ore and coal see significant price correction. Okay. If that does not happen, we should be looking at the bottom of price and things to be only looking up from there.
Thank you so much. And we will take up audience queries now. Aditya Raj from Steel Mint is asking you, how would you see auto production market in the next quarter?
See, auto production historically got impacted because of semiconductor situation, which has improved, yet the risks remain. Okay, because today the semiconductor production is limited to few geographies. It is not readily, let's say, reallocated into many other places. At the same time, the current buying of automobiles is less. People are not spending that much money considering the pressure of high cost and inflation they are figuring out. Okay, so as far as Thailand goes, I don't expect a significant change. It's going to operate in a narrow band, of 2 million vehicles per year range. Possibly domestic sales will be less. They will have to depend more on exports, okay, for the time being. But there is not significant change happening. Thailand is encouraging EVs. Some policies to incentivize the industry are on the table, but I don't think so it has been fully announced. So Thailand also faces challenge from Vietnam. Vietnam is attracting a lot of new auto investments as compared to Thailand. So that will also have to be seen, which way the future investments in auto industry come in the region.
So there is a huge stress on decarbonization, and you said that that region is predominantly an ES driven market. Now, what are your views on green steel development capacity building coming up there?
Electric arc furnace traditionally generates around 0.6 ton of CO2 on every ton of crude steel production versus blast furnace, which is typically 2.2 to 2.4. So anyway, we are at around 30%, of that side. So while the pressure is more on blast furnace guys, I think, but electric arc furnace route players also cannot stay complacent. So the efforts that we see in the industry, what we are doing at Tata Steel, one is we are constantly working both to improve our energy efficiency, how we can reduce energy consumption in our business, both through operational controls as well as through capital expenditure plans. There is a fair amount of solar energy being explored. Tata Steel is in the process of commissioning 12 megawatt of solar power plant, in our factory. That should help us to produce green energy as well as at a lower cost, because the technology has enabled the cost of solar energy to significantly come down. Challenges remain on storage till we find an economic way to store energy, because a lot of times steel industry in the region operates in the night. Okay, and that's a time we are fully dependent on the grid as solar and other options do not work out. So there is an effort to look at. I see some small projects being explored on hydrogen, or let's say green hydrogen, but not significantly. It will be more of a brown hydrogen here. I think green will be more in the Middle East. So electric arc furnace focus is on better quality raw materials, consume less energy, possibly look at more wind and solar for the time being, till technology advancements happen, and it can help us to cut down, from this current level of 0.5, 0.6 tons of crude steel of CO2, maybe to half or maybe lower than that in the next 5 to 10 years.
The new capacities that are going to come up, like, where is the thrust? To what extent, I should say, is the thrust on green steel there?
Most of the new capacities are in blast furnace. Okay, so they will come up with the handicap of higher CO2 emissions. Unfortunately, this region is still not so much regimented or regulated on account of carbon emissions. Singapore has a small carbon tax. Indonesia announced something, a small number, but it does not move the needle. Okay, most of the other countries are still talking about it, but it doesn't hit the bottom line. Now, till there is a carbon tax, either in the country or crossing the borders, it's a good subject to talk about, but financially, one has to balance the bottom line. For example, even when I talk about Tata Steel Thailand, our domestic customers are not paying any dollar extra for green steel. They give us a preference compared to any other steel, but they are not today paying extra dollar. When we supply to multinationals who are supplying in other geographies, they are ready to give us a premium. Okay, so the pull for low carbon steel will only go up. Space will have to be seen at what speed it pulls up, and a lot depends on the technology that will come into the system, which will help us to actually decarbonize. Today, the current options are not so cost effective. Governments have spoken about it, but governments have not put money on it. The way we see investment supports coming in Europe, I have not seen that in the region. So till decarbonization will have to be supported by government, steel plant, and the consumer. Three set of stakeholders have to kind of support it. Today, government and customers are not so actively supporting as it is in West, but it will improve. And I think that is where the speed of decarbonization will increase or improve in ASEAN region.
I think we have time for just one last question. Someone wants to know about the export scenario of finished steel products from India to Thailand. In particular, if India is enjoying any advantage with Thailand as compared to other regional players.
Yes, India has a free trade agreement with Thailand, so it does not attract any duty. However, there are certain other tariff barriers in flat products. Rebars from India into Thailand does not make sense. Wire rods do come in. We have seen before the tax imposition in May, there was fair amount of wire rods which were imported into Thailand from Indian steel companies. So Thailand remains, I think, one of the bright spots for export, largely for long product, because flat will have some sort of different kind of a tariff barrier, not free trade agreement. And that's why I don't see much of primary flat product HRCR coming to the country. If India wants to export into Thailand, I think they will have to look at more value-added product, coated steel. That is where the potential is higher as compared to standard basic steel. India also has a potential to export billet. Thailand is a regular importer of 1 to 1.5 million tons of billet every year. So that should also be an opportunity for Indian exporters.
I want to sneak in one last question. What is the outlook on billet prices, sir? One gentleman wants to know.
My take is billet prices will correct downwards. Till a week ago, Southeast Asian prices were in the range of around, let's say, $530 to $540. Today, I think it should be around $510. And going ahead, I expect those prices to be in the vicinity of $500. So next 1 to 1.5 months, I expect billet prices to come down.
Thank you so much, sir. That was a very, very informative and engaging session. We have to close the session for want of time. And I hope everyone who tuned in enjoyed it as much as we did hosting it. It was on what are the factors driving steel demand recovery in ASEAN. A very warm thank you to Mr. Rajiv Mangal for your valuable time. Thank you to Nishta Mukherjee for joining in too. A big thank you to the Ministry of Steel and the Indian Steel Association for their local support. Before we end, a reminder to join us for the next webinar on what to expect from Chinese steel market in Q1 2023. It will begin at 12:30 p.m. Thank you so much. I'm Madhumita Mukherjee, editor Steel Mint, taking your leave. Bye.
Thank you for inviting me. It was a pleasure. Have a nice day.